When you think of The Legend of Zelda, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Maybe it's a specific game, maybe it's some of the incredible music, or maybe it's the vast land of Hyrule that we've been able to explore so many different times. There are loads of things you could probably think of just by hearing those 4 simple words, but there is one thing you probably never thought you'd see, and that's Link holding a fucking crossbow. If you were around back in the mid-2000s, you will remember the huge emphasis of new peripherals to improve any video game experience. Nowadays, it's mainly things like virtual reality, but back then, the big new idea was motion controls. And what's the first console you think of when you hear motion controls? If you said anything other than the Wii, you're just a fucking liar. Nintendo was the forefront of the motion control movement with the announcement of the Wii, along with great games like Wii Sports, as well as this shit. Other gaming companies tried to dive into this market as well, but they didn't fare nearly as well. Either from not just having any good games or just the controller looking like a dildo, no one could compete with Nintendo. To be fair, the Wii also did have its fair share of dumb controller accessories, but none were as dumb as this. The Wii was by far the console with the most gimmicks in its games. Since its entire existence relied on motion controls, almost every game added them in some way. This made the games more unique, and they felt like they actually belonged on the Wii without the controls feeling forced. If only the Wii U did that. So many games were based solely around pointing and swinging and were used on some of Nintendo's most iconic characters. Just look at Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. All that game was a cash grab at everyone who wanted Mario and Sonic to face off since the 90s with motion controls slapped on top of it. The game was still fun, don't get me wrong, but that's really all it was. And Mario wasn't the only major Nintendo character to get a whole game based around motion controls. The greatest Nintendo franchise to ever exist also got one, but in a much more weirder and confusing way. Today, we're taking a look at Link's crossbow training. Yeah, ignore the small case, it's the only one I could get, so relax. Link's Crossbow Training was released on November 19th, 2007 and was actually first released in North America and was released last in Japan. Of course, the Zelda game with a gun would be released in America first. The game was originally developed to be a side story to Twilight Princess with its own story entirely, which is pretty obvious since it uses the exact same engine and art style as Twilight Princess. Although for some reason, it uses the GameCube version of Twilight Princess for its background instead of the Wii version. You might be asking yourself, wait, why does that matter? Aren't they the same game? Why, yes, you would be right, random person I completely made up for this video. They are the same game, but the Wii version is actually mirrored from the original to work with the Wii remote being used mainly in people's right hands. The two games are literally the exact same, just completely reversed, if that makes any sense. At some point in development, Miyamoto decided that he wanted the game turned either into a first-person shooter or a third-person shooter using the Wii Zapper accessory, just one of the many useless Wii accessories for a normal person. He said he wanted the game to not have any grand story or cutscenes, and just wanted a game with short stages the player needed to complete. So if you wanted some sort of story, why the f*** are you playing this game? The developers had a lot of trouble trying to figure out how they wanted to go about making a Zelda first-person shooter, but there is one idea that Miyamoto specifically had which I honestly wish happened. He gave the idea of Link transporting to the regular world and using an AK-47 to defend Tokyo from Zelda monsters. Yes, that is an actual thing that could have happened. It was shut down immediately by everyone else and called, quote, atrocious, and yeah, I can see why. But just imagining the idea of Link shooting moblins with an AK-47 is enough to make me realize Miyamoto is goddamn crazy. Eventually, they decided on Link using a crossbow and the final idea of the game was decided upon. As I mentioned earlier, this game takes place in the same Hyrule that Twilight Princess takes place in. Every stage is reminiscent of an area from that game, anywhere from Ordon Village, Kakariko Village, Zora River, and so much more. Every stage is created to fit a specific style because this game has 3 different types of stages. The 3 types are target shooting, defender, and ranger. I will give you one guess as to what the target shooting stages have you do. If you guess that you shoot targets, yeah, no shit. The targets are scattered all over the stages which you need to shoot with your crossbow to earn points. They start pretty basic with stationary targets, but they eventually start to move as you progress through the game. And to shoot these targets, you gotta use the Wii Zapper, which I don't own and technically have never owned, so my opinions on how this game controls might not be the most accurate since I've technically never played the game the way it's supposed to be played. But I'm not trying to drop like $7 on something I'm only gonna use for this game. Please don't judge me. These target levels, along with all the others, have a pretty simple goal of just scoring as many points as you possibly can. Obviously, the main draw of the stages is to shoot the targets, which will give you a good amount of points, but there are so many other things that you can shoot in each level, like the Ordon Village stage lets you shoot the Scarecrow and pumpkins, although it's not nearly as satisfying as shooting the pumpkins in Skyward Sword. Every stage has something like this of some sort of object that you can shoot which is specific to that location from Twilight Princess. This really just helps add to the immersion of the game and really makes you feel like you're in Hyrule instead of just some random target shooter with a Hyrule-esque background. All of those objects are worth different points, but usually give you a little bit less than a normal target. Each normal target is worth only 10 points, but will give you 30 points if you get a bullseye. That probably sounds like not very many points, and you would be right, which is why you need to combo multiple bullseyes in a row, which can let you rack up tons of points. The number of bullseyes you get in a row is the multiplier that determines how many points your bullseye is worth. So let's say you have a 20-shot combo. That means that the bullseye will be worth 30 points times 20, aka 600 points. And I don't know how good you guys are at math, but I bet you can tell that 600 is just a bit more than 30. This is probably an insanely good hint and you would never guess this on how to be good at the game, but you want to hit bullseyes to win. I know, who would have guessed? None of these target levels are very complex, but they are all so much fun and all have a unique style. Plus, who wouldn't want to shoot a Goron in the dick? God, I love this game. The second type of level in the game is called Defender and is a bit more advanced and intricate than the target levels. These levels have you stand in just one place the whole time, but you can rotate in 360 degrees. You need to fight off a horde of enemies which will depend on what location you are in. Some are definitely more intimidating than others though. Like I am much more afraid of a horde of Stalfos marching towards me than some puny little Tektites. Holy shit, never mind. These levels are kind of reminiscent of zombies from Call of Duty, except without the movement, the multiplayer, the large map. Okay, they're not even close to the same, but they have the same premise of just shooting anything that moves near you. These levels can get pretty difficult once tons of enemies are attacking you, but on certain levels, super powerful glowing enemies will appear, and when you shoot them, your crossbow will turn into a fucking machine gun. If you didn't believe Miyamoto wanted Link to use an AK-47 before, you'd better believe it now. This definitely takes a lot of the skill out of the game since you can just basically spin around in circles, but I'd be lying if I said this wasn't the best part of the entire game. Mowing down waves of Stalfos with a machine gun is so satisfying, and I need an automatic crossbow to be a weapon in Breath of the Wild 2. The third type of stage in the game is called Ranger, and these are without a doubt the best levels in the whole game. I know that I said the automatic shooting was the best part like 10 seconds ago, and you might be calling me a hypocrite, but you should know that by now. While all the other stages just have you pointing at the screen and pressing one button, now you get to use a control stick too. God, this game is so advanced. You get to use the nunchuck to control Link through different environments, including things like an enemy base. This adds a whole new level of strategy and skill to the game since you actually need to scan your surroundings for more than just a target, and the environment isn't just the same thing the entire time. You might be saying, doesn't that just make these levels exactly like Twilight Princess just with a crossbow? And to that I have to say, yeah. Some of the levels, specifically the first Ranger level, definitely feel a little too similar to how these areas played in Twilight Princess, but it's still not exactly the same. Plus, it's a nice change of pace from just standing around and shooting things. Now you're moving around and shooting things. Such variety! So now that I've talked about all the different types of stages in this game, I probably should touch on how the controls actually work for the Wii Remote. It works exactly the same as every other game. See ya! Okay, no. Obviously, you use the Wii Remote to point at the screen to shoot targets the same way you would use the pointer in a game like Mario Galaxy. I have never encountered any problems with aiming, even though I've heard some people struggle with it, and I really don't know how. If you just put the sensor bar in a reasonable place near your TV, there should be no issues. Sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable because, remember, I don't have a Wii Zapper, so I don't know what it feels like to really hold the remote like a gun the way it's intended to be, which could make the experience more comfortable, but it's really not a big issue. As long as you're not holding it like this, you should be fine. Oh, and by the way, I lied. There's actually one more type of level, but there's just only 2 of them in the whole game. These are boss levels, which are basically just a combination of Defender and Ranger levels. It's a Defender level since you need to defeat an enemy in a small arena, but it's also a Ranger level since you get to control Link's movement. They're pretty simplistic like normal Zelda bosses with a pattern that you can quickly learn. Just dodge their attacks and then shoot the shit out of them. Easy as pie. The only 2 bosses are at the end of the final 2 levels. Level 8 has a Darknut as its boss. He will throw keys at you which you will need to dodge, then shoot a bomb arrow at him so his armor falls off. Eventually he becomes fucking Dracula and turns into a bunch of keys which you need to shoot until he gets too weak and then you can kill him. He's a pretty cool looking boss, I'll give him that, but he's way easier in this game than he is in Twilight Princess. Maybe it's just me, but I think the Darknuts in that game are insanely difficult to kill. The second boss is at the end of level F, which stands for Fuck. Level Finale hosts the final boss of the game which they brought over from the best major boss from that entire game, Fossil Stalord. Oh man, he had such a unique and incredible boss fight in Twilight Princess. I can't wait to see what kind of fight he had. You just shoot his hands? Okay, like that's nothing we've ever seen before. Nintendo. No, sorry, Miyamoto. I'm speaking specifically to you here. Of all the things you could have done for the final boss, you used the most overused and cliche boss fight ever for a shooting game. This is something you do for like the first boss of the game to get you used to the controls, not the goddamn final boss. And also, why did you have to use the coolest looking boss from Twilight Princess for this shit? Why not someone like Fyrus who no one even cares about? Probably like half the people watching this didn't even know who Fyrus was until I just showed a picture of him. This game has such a high potential for an incredible boss fight. Imagine a boss fight with multiple stages where maybe you can start with this boss, but then it turns into an on-rail shooter where you are just chasing Star-Lord and shooting him in midair as you both move around. Basically what I'm saying is take Star-Lord's battle from Twilight Princess, but just give Link a crossbow. That would have been great, and it only took me like 10 seconds to come up with that. But instead, we got stuck with this. I'm so sorry, Star-Lord. You deserved better. Link's crossbow training isn't any spectacular or grand Zelda adventure, but it's just Link with a crossbow, and how could you not love that? Even though all the assets were stripped straight from Twilight Princess, the game still has its own charm and feels like an extension of that game. I know some people don't like Twilight Princess's art because they think it's too dark, but I don't really think that's the case here. Everything here is very visible, which is definitely important for a shooter. The variety of levels they give you really adds a lot to the game and really improves the experience. If the game was only shooting targets, it would get way too repetitive. But just by adding a few new aspects to certain levels, the game feels like it has a completely different vibe. Also, adding a machine gun fucking helps. The controls are pretty good without the Wii Zapper, and I'm willing to bet that it's even better with it. But if it's actually worse with the Zapper, don't blame me, I didn't tell you to buy it and I didn't make it. The only real complaint I have is that the game is too short. This entire game will take you like an hour to complete, which is not nearly enough gameplay for a full-length game. You can always try to beat your high score or compete against your friends, but that's only fun for so long. But then again, you can also get this game for like $5 now, so it's definitely worth that price. But aside from that, there's really not much to complain about. This game's pretty damn good. Except for this. This game is nothing more than just a spin-off title, and you can't really expect a bestseller or anything from that. It's just a fun and short game, which is all it was meant to be. I just hope they can eventually take some ideas from this game and implement them into a main series Zelda game because I just want some variety. I need a Zelda game with guns, and then I can die happy. Ah shit, never mind.